The Apostle Paul, who was not strictly an apostle, began as a fierce enemy of Christians, persecuting and abusing them. But he suddenly claimed to have had a vision of Jesus on the road to Damascus, an experience that changed his life. He went from being a persecutor to a preacher, becoming one of Christianity's greatest defenders, spreading its message throughout the ancient world. The mystery of Paul is what exactly happened during this vision. Was it a divine revelation, a spiritual experience, or something else? What moved him, who was so ardently opposed to Christianity, to become its most passionate defender? Paul's writings and teachings also raise questions. His letters played a huge role in shaping the early church and Christian doctrine, but some of his views, such as on women and homosexuality, continue to cause controversy today. Paul's radical transformation, his enormous influence, and the incomplete details of his conversion make him one of the most fascinating and enigmatic figures in the Bible. The apostles Peter and Paul are among the most revered followers of Christ and founders of the Christian faith. But here's the interesting thing: Apostle Paul was not among the 12 disciples called by Jesus Christ. And he never accompanied the Savior on his earthly journey. Moreover, he is not among the so-called 70 apostles. So how did Apostle Paul come to be so important to Christianity? Paul was of Jewish descent. He was born in Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey, and was given the name Saul. Since his father was a Pharisee, he raised his son in the same traditions. The future apostle's family enjoyed high status and even had Roman citizenship, a privilege few Jews could enjoy at the time. Apparently, Saul was preparing to become a rabbi in the future. He knew some crafts and could support himself. He also studied the basics of Greco-Roman culture, rhetoric, philosophy, literature. Later, Saul went to study in Jerusalem. He was probably there on Easter, when Jesus Christ was executed. In the first years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, Saul was still very young and susceptible to outside influences. In addition, his Pharisee background played a role, and for the Pharisees, Christ's preaching was an open heresy. Therefore, Saul actively participated in the persecution of the first Christians. The future follower of Christ is first mentioned in a very dark episode, the massacre of the first martyr Stephen. He is considered the first person in history to suffer for the Christian faith. Stephen was a Jew, but he followed the teachings of Christ, for which he was stoned. Saul also participated in this execution. A key biblical episode involving Saul occurred when he traveled to the Syrian city of Damascus. The story is told in the Acts of the Apostles. On the way to Damascus, Saul suddenly heard the voice of Christ asking, "Why do you persecute me?" And he trembled and said, "Lord, what do you have me to do?" And the Lord said to him, "Arise and go into the city, and it will be told you what you must do." Saul fell to the ground in fear, and when he got up, he found that he had gone blind. The people who had accompanied him on the road helped him get to Damascus. Saul refused to eat or drink for 3 days. However, in Damascus, a Christian named Ananias approached him and restored his sight. After this, Saul was baptized and became known as the Apostle Paul. After his conversion, Paul became one of the main followers of Christ's teachings. Around the year 39, he again visited Jerusalem and reconciled with the Christians living there. Apostle Paul preached in Arabia, Antioch and his hometown of Tarsus, founding new churches. Later, Apostle Paul returned to Jerusalem, where he stood trial before the Sanhedrin. He was accused of desecrating the Temple of Solomon. However, Paul still retained Roman citizenship, so the Sanhedrin could not sentence him to death. The apostle was transported several times to different cities of the Roman Empire and tried again. Around the year 60, he ended up in Rome, where he spent 2 years and left several more letters. Later, the apostle was released and preached for several more years in different parts of the empire. Around the year 66, he returned to Rome together with Apostle Peter, which is why their names are often mentioned together. In Rome, both apostles met a martyr's death. Peter was crucified upside down, and Paul was beheaded. Paul's sentence can be called lenient. Usually, followers of the new faith were killed in a more sophisticated way. Apparently, the apostles' Roman citizenship played a role again. The exact burial place of Apostle Paul remained a mystery for 2 millennia. However, under the altar of the Basilica of St. Paul in Rome, there was a very ancient sarcophagus. It was believed that it belonged to the apostle. But for a long time, people were afraid to touch it due to the fragility and antiquity of the relic. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI announced that the sarcophagus would be subjected to scientific research for the first time. A tiny hole was made in its wall and the contents were examined. Research is ongoing, but the discoveries already made indicate that the remains inside could belong to the Apostle Paul.